All right, listen the fuck up, chat. Listen, if you are watching this stream and you are somewhat left leaning, progressive, perhaps, and you're interested in seeing progressive W's, progressive victories, one might say, around the world, well, you might have one in the United States. So let's talk about it. We're going to talk about undocumented migrants, okay? It's a big issue in the United States, apparently. So, first of all, I guess we'll just talk about them. Undocumented and unauthorized border crossings are like a very hot button topic because it's very easy for right wingers to capitalize on border crossings because they are very nebulous. People can use their imaginations quite a lot to infer what's happening with border crossings. They can talk about like military-aged men, men of fighting age, crossing the border illegally. We don't know what they're doing here, and they're coming in boats or they're crossing the border, like things like that. It's very good for fear mongering. It's very easy to exaggerate. It's very easy to leave details up to the imagination, so people capitalize on it. You know, with the Tories, despite the small numbers and their pretty poor success rates, are very obsessed with the idea of stop the boats, right? Because people don't like the idea of boats coming into the UK unauthorized, even though they are legal under international law, under international laws that the UK is signed up to. They're allowed to come here and claim asylum, especially if they have no other way of doing it before they arrive. That's like a very written in thing. So the Tories have stopped the boats as a way to drum up support from people who don't like migrants. And then if you go to Reform Party, they think it's not even hard enough. So I guess theirs is going to logically conclude as maybe sink the boats. Who knows? But for the United States, they have kind of like a different issue because in the United States, there are quite a lot of undocumented migrants living in the country. About 10.5 million estimated. Now, that was higher. It used to be about 12 million, thanks to things like Obama being the whatever deporter in chief. That number went down a bit. But yeah, it's about 10 million living in the United States. And the question is, that's a lot of illegals. Sounds really crazy. Well, what happens? What do we do about it? Well, first of all, descriptively, they are generally ineligible for most federal benefits, undocumented migrants. They are eligible for some things, though. They can get emergency Medicaid, they can get vaccines, they can get disaster relief, they can get, in 16 states, they can actually even get driver's licenses. So they can get a few things. In terms of how they get here, it varies. In increasing numbers, I think in recent years, large numbers of people who are undocumented migrants in the United States get there by overstaying a legal entry. So they enter legally, but they overstay. And that's how they become an undocumented or an illegal, right? I think right now it's about just under half of them are overstayers, and the rest of them are like they either cross illegally or they break the rules after crossing or something like that. More than half of them have been in the United States for over a decade. So there are questions. There are questions like, what do you do with them at the border if you find them? How do you sort out the ones who have legitimate reasons to be crossing the border in that way versus the ones who don't? There's questions of like lawyers, policing, due process, things like that. These are all very like difficult questions. Questions that it doesn't seem like the Republicans want to answer, because Biden, in his effort to get funding for Ukraine, did offer a bipartisan immigration bill. The Republicans said no to it because the Republicans need immigration to run on an election on. They need to have immigration as an open issue for an election. It's like their way of using it to drum up support. So they don't really have an interest in fixing the problem. So when it comes to migrants that are here, though, that's a different question, because no one seriously believes that you're deporting 10 plus million people. There might be debates over whether or not you might give them citizenship or pass the citizenship, and you want to do that in a way that doesn't incentivize more crossings from people who think that they can just cross, live here for 10 years and then just get citizenship or things like that. But realistically, they're not getting deported. They're also, in America, they're more or less part of the economy. Especially in particular areas like farm work. Because I think in farm work in America, about just under half of the crop workers are unauthorized migrants. So they do have a position in the United States system right now. When it comes to crime rates, is something that people often drum up. As far as I know, I've looked at a couple of studies. There's not really any good convincing data that they have any positive or negative effect on crime rates. Some of them suggest that they commit less crime than natives and legal foreign-borns, which would probably make sense because the consequences of them breaking the law and being caught are far more severe as an undocumented migrant compared to a native. But yeah, there's a couple of studies here. Increased undocumented immigration was significantly associated with reductions in drug arrests, drug overdose deaths, and DUI arrests, net of other factors. There was no significant relationship between increased undocumented immigration and DUI deaths. So that's even suggesting that they commit less crime. So, yeah, the question is what to do with them. Well, if you're a Republican, you generally want to work to, I guess, deport as many of them as possible, maybe not all 10 million, because you want to use them to set an example. Which is why Trump in 2016 spoke quite a lot about how he wanted to get rid of DACA. DACA, which is a kind of like piece of legislation that protects undocumented migrants in a temporary way, like before they can get a path to citizenship. So it's kind of like it's not really like a full path to citizenship, but it's a sort of temporary safeguard. But that doesn't cover that many people. It covers like a few 100,000. But it turns out Joe Biden, just recently, like last week or something, has brought another action that shields a further 500,000 migrants from deportation. And the people that he's shielding are undocumented spouses of US citizens. So if you are an undocumented migrant and you're married to a US citizen, you can be deported because you're still undocumented, right? But in the name of keeping families together, in the name of just being sensible and recognizing that you're not actually going to deport this many people, this new action from Biden is going to shield about 500,000 migrants. I think DACA was something like, what, 600,000 or 700,000? So yeah, this would be the biggest protection of undocumented migrants since DACA. It's quite big. It's most likely going to face challenges in the courts because I think it was an executive action. Yeah, it was. But yeah, something that you definitely wouldn't have got from Republicans because obviously Trump in 2016 was interested in trying to get DACA removed. I think there were only, was it one or two? I think it was one. I think they were one Supreme Court vote away from getting rid of DACA. So these people are in a pretty vulnerable position. But thanks to Biden, there's a little bit more safeguarding going on. Let's hear him talking about it.
Second action I'm announcing today was about keeping families together. My dad used to have an expression. He said, Joey, family's about the beginning, middle, and the end. About keeping couples together who are married, where one spouse is a U.S. citizen, the other is undocumented. They've been living in the United States for at least 10 years.
I love the memes.
These couples have been raising families.
Using conservative rhetoric and invoking conservative family values to back your action in providing protections for undocumented migrants. That's so good. Well done, Joe.
Sending their kids to church and school, paying taxes, contributing to our country for 10 years or more. Matter of fact, the average time they've spent here is 23 years. People are affected today. But living in the United States, all this time, with fear and uncertainty. We can fix that, and that's what I'm going to do today.
Jesus Christ.
It doesn't require any fundamental change in our immigration law. There's already a system in place for people we're talking about today. But the process is cumbersome, risky, and separates families. Under the current process, undocumented spouses of U.S. citizens must go back to their home country, for example, Mexico, to fill out paperwork and obtain long-term legal status. They have to leave their families in America with no assurance to fill out back in the United States. So they stay in America, but in the shadows, living in constant fear of deportation without the ability to legally work. All this, even though under the law today, they are eligible for long-term legal status. Today I'm announcing a common sense fix to streamline the process for obtaining legal status for immigrants married to American citizens who lived here for a long time. For those wives or husbands and their children who have lived in America for a decade or more but are undocumented, this action will allow them to file paperwork for legal status in the United States, allow them to work while they remain with their families in the United States. Let's be clear. This action still requires undocumented spouses to file all required legal paperwork to remain in the United States. It requires them to pass a criminal background check. And it doesn't apply to anyone trying to come here today. It only applies, this action is a better way. It doesn't tear families apart while requiring every undocumented spouse to fulfill their obligations under the law. Look, the action I'm announcing today will go into effect later this summer. And by the way, just as was true for the protection of dreamers, the steps I'm taking today are overwhelmingly supported by the American people, no matter what the other team says. In fact, polls show over 70% of Americans support this effort.
This is actually really good evidence for the fact that we need more illegal migrants in the United States so that they can get more audio engineers. Because apparently NBC News doesn't have good enough audio engineers to balance out this segment. It's so easy to just put a compressor on it, and then you can even bounce it and look at the audio file as it evens out. You can put a limiter. Oh God! Woo, Biden, boop. All right. Anyway, Republicans cringe, Trump cringe. They want to use immigration as a weapon to win the election. They don't even want to fix it. Whereas Biden, very sensible, giving 500,000 people who have lived in America for a long time and are married to citizens a bit more protection, a bit more of a right to stay in the country. Good. Very good. What do you think about the leftist critique of liberal immigration policy? What, the idea that companies abuse migrants to lower wages? Well, for American undocumented migrants, there isn't very much evidence anywhere of them suppressing wages, apart from maybe, and this is what I saw from research as well, the big maybe might be on farm work, because so many farm workers, crop workers are illegals. But again, like, I don't know. In the broad scale, no, I don't think it does. I think it's very much like, it's economics 101, but like without the one. It's like economics just 101. It's incomplete. People think that increasing the supply of labor reduces the cost. That's only one part of it, though. That only works if you assume that like time in this economy is static. Because if more migrants come in and they take more jobs, what that also might do is you have more laborers who are filling different skill sets who can be employable by employers who might not otherwise be employing anyone. So what happens in a lot of, I think in research from around the world is when migrants come in, I think it was Greece was one example, was that when migrants came there, it opened up opportunities for lower middle class people to open businesses where they wouldn't have had the workforce there to do it before. Or it's also the idea that if you have migrant laborers, they might fill up gaps and do jobs that produce more goods, and then the cost of those goods gets reduced, like goods and services. Albanian workforce in Greece. Yeah, that's one example. And actually, companies in Scandinavia that were, I think it was, I can't remember, this is a long time ago I researched this, but there was one, there were companies in Scandinavia where one of them actually did use migrant labor and the other one didn't. And then one of them like had to close or something. So, yeah. So no, the evidence, like any wage suppression that does seem to happen from them is negligible if it is there. But it's also made up for by the fact that they contribute more to the exchequer or to the treasury, whatever country you're talking about, than they take out. So even then, you still get the money back in a different way, whether it's through like government spending or reduced cost of goods and services, or at least goods and services not going up as fast as they would in price. Yeah, things like that. So you can tell because think about countries that work, the case study country that works really hard to keep migrants out, like Japan. I feel like their economy's fucked, but you know, and they're like aging populations and things like that. Because again, like migrants are generally younger on average. But okay. There's the argument that it reduces the bargaining power of unions. Yes, but the other problem there is whether or not that's the union's fault or the migrants' fault. Because in the UK, one problem was that migrants did reduce the bargaining power of unions, but that's because unions themselves worked very hard to keep migrants out, especially in the 60s and 70s. So unions who were keeping migrants out would actually go to lengths where they would even collaborate with bosses to lock migrants out of certain levels of employment in a company. I think there was a study on it called like unequal comrades or something like that. Yeah, that was a really big problem too. So that goes both ways too. There might be such a thing as migrants being less likely to unionize, but there's also such a thing as unions being less likely to encourage migrants to join or more likely to try and push them out. So it becomes a kind of divide and conquer, but it's being done by the unions, not by the bosses. Yeah. Or they're complicit, that kind of thing. Yeah. Anyway, that's the news. Trump cringe, Biden based. Let's go. Anyway.